And go.
Okay, this is the second lecture. This is a revision recap lecture for the... See, I told you I can never...
3.
So, does the media influence us? If we see an ad on our way into the lecture theatre on a morning going to university, are we going to stop and rush off and buy the product that's just been sold to us or not? To what extent does this happen? And more importantly, why, how and under what circumstances are we influenced by the media? Now, there are 3 main points of view that we see a lot in society as to whether or not we're influenced.
3.
This is a recap revision lecture for representations of childhood for the second main lecture of the course, which is on an overview of theories about whether or not the media influences us, and more importantly, whether or not the media influences children in day-to-day life. In terms of the question, does the media influence us? There are 3 main schools of thought that we can uncover by looking at society at large. 3 main attitudes that people hold. We're going to go through each of these in turn and see what's right or wrong about these dominant views. The first one we call the hypodermic syringe model. The second one, the savvy consumer model. And the third one, the concept of codes within media analysis. So, the hypodermic syringe model. By this concept, the media is like a syringe that you just inject into your body, and the liquid goes in and the media has gone in, and you're now like a zombie or a robot and you do what the media tells you. When we say it as simply as that, it sounds slightly silly. And it is slightly silly because we're not zombies and we're not lacking in free will, and we do make our own choices. And when we stop and think about it, we realise that that is true. However, we can't dismiss this hypodermic syringe model out of hand, because in society as a whole, it's actually a very dominant belief. If there is a tragic child murder, for example, a repeat of something like the Jamie Bulger incident, where some children commit a terrible atrocity and kill another child, or if there is a school shooting, or if there is some other tragedy like this, the government will instantly turn to the hypodermic syringe model and start frothing at the mouth, calling for censorship of children's media. They always do. And when we look at what they speak, what they say, when they promote these calls for censorship, they are drawing entirely on this concept that certain people in society are completely programmable by the media, without free will, without integrity or ethical consciousness of their own, and will simply do what the media tell them. So if there is a spate of car thefts, somebody in the political arena will call for the banning of Grand Theft Auto, whatever the latest release of that video game is, because they will promote a concept that young people play this video game, and by playing it have the idea that they should steal a car made more accessible to them, and therefore they just do what they've been programmed to do by the video game. When we really unpick what this belief is about, however, we find great layers of racism, sexism, and in particular social class discrimination. For the strange thing is that the politicians who will cry for the banning of Chucky films because a child committed a murder, or the banning of Grand Theft Auto because there's an increase in car thefts, will never consider themselves in any way vulnerable to going out and committing a crime because the media told them to. It's always black people in particular who are the focus of these moral panics. So white people can listen to jazz all they like, even if they're talking about themes of sex, violence, criminality within the music. No one gets very upset. Someone releases a new rap song with an awful lot of themes of sex and violence in it, and there's this sudden fear among the ruling classes that every young black boy is going to be out fornicating under every single lamppost and killing everybody because the music they listen to made them do it. Equally, as well as when we see this theory actually has very large racist components, we see that it has sexist and in particular class components to it as well. And one of the ways we can see this as a theme over time is by looking back to the legal case that emerged over the publication of the book Lady Chatterley's Lover. Lady Chatterley's Lover was a book produced in hardback which detailed in a slightly erotic way the story of a married woman who had an affair. 50 Shades of Grey it was not, it was of its time, but there was a small amount of titillation in it. When it was released in hardback, it was read by the well-to-do who could afford hardback books, and nobody was remotely concerned. Because it did well in publications, the following year the publishers chose to release it as a paperback to a wider market, and there was a legal challenge to the release of the paperback. There was a court case which went on for a very long time, which was quite divisive in English society and brought focus on these ideas. One of the key points of the trial, there was a famous question that was asked, which was then repeated over and over because it helped us so expose these views. One of the defendants was arguing that the book should be released in paperback and made the point that he himself had read it and had not gone out and had an affair as a result. So the questioning lawyer turned to him and said, "Yes, that's all very well, but do you want your maid to read it?" The implication being very strong that a common sense assumption was coming through here, that a white middle class man could read a book and not be remotely influenced and made zombie fashion to instantly rush out and have an affair. But if the maid read the book, that she would be much more weak-minded, have far less free will, and instantly go out and have an affair as a result of reading a book which detailed that subject matter. So we can see that these prevalent beliefs in society focus on race, class and gender when we talk about the extent to which people are influenced by the media, and generally seek to protect, in particular, children, black people, women and the less privileged, less well off and working class in particular, and promote censorship for them but not for the dominant or ruling classes in society who are seen not to require censorship. And these are some of our problems with the hypodermic syringe model of media analysis and why we need to be critical and analytical of them and recognise them when we see them for what they are. However, if we've now just thoroughly dismissed and sneered at the idea that the media completely influences us, that it turns us into zombies who rush out and instantly steal a car because we played Grand Theft Auto or whatever, and accept that that doesn't actually happen, that a kid could sit and play Grand Theft Auto and then go and lay the table for dinner for Mammy with no problems whatsoever, are we saying that the media, therefore, does not influence us? And this is the other point of view, which we also see as a discourse in society quite a bit. We are savvy consumers, we know what we're doing, we know what we're purchasing, we see an ad, it makes no difference, we make our own choices as to whether we purchase that product or not, and the media has no influence on us. We have agency, we have free will, we make our own decisions. There is in fact just as obvious a problem with this dominant idea that many people hold. And the problem is this: if that were true, advertising would not be a multi-billion-dollar industry, whereas in fact advertising is an enormous industry. Producers market their goods to us through ads because it works. Because if a product is constantly advertised, sales will increase. This has to be more than people as savvy consumers making purely intellectual decisions based on the information they have available to them about what products are out there. In fact, the success of advertising shows us that we are not entirely savvy consumers, that we are influenced by the media and the messages that we get. Therefore, this model is, in its own way, just as wrong as the preceding hypodermic syringe model. Now that leaves us stuck in a middle ground. We can't quite say which is it. We know that we're not zombies without free will, totally programmable every time we turn on the television, yet we know that we're not entirely free from influence. We know that we will be more likely to buy a product if it's advertised at us constantly. So now we need to look at the intervening space in between, where we ask ourselves, okay, so if we're not always influenced, but we're sometimes influenced, how come? When? Under what circumstances? How does this influence actually come about? And when we do that, we start talking about two very, very important concepts. The first one is the concept of our own worldview and our own life. It becomes very important. If I see an ad for a car, I'm not going to be influenced by that car ad in any way. I do not drive a car. So if you show me an ad for the latest Ford or the latest Mercedes-Benz or any other car, it's going to have no influence on me whatsoever. Equally, an ad for car insurance is going to be water off a duck's back. I can watch them all I like in the world. I will never be influenced by them. It is not part of my worldview to be concerned about cars or any of the secondary products that go with them, such as car insurance. However, if you show me an ad for dog food, I might pay a lot of attention. I might wonder, okay, so why is Pedigree Chum better than Baker's? And I'll start paying attention to the television in that moment because it's trying to sell me dog food and I have an interest in dog food. Therefore, I have moved from a space where I can't be influenced into a space where I can, and that depends on who I am. It also depends on what my worldview is. What are the core beliefs that I hold and hold already, which shape how I respond to the media? So in the classroom lecture we took an example of whether someone is pro-life or pro-choice. If I show the whole class, 100 of you, a video which is pro-choice, those of you who are pro-life are not going to be influenced by this video in any way. You will reject the messages in it because they do not sit with your worldview. It's no different from showing me an ad for car insurance. It's something I just ignore. Those of you, on the other hand, who do agree with the messages in the ad, can have those assumptions that you already hold reinforced in the same way that I might be having my assumptions that I already hold, that buying dog food for the doggy is very important. I might have my political beliefs reinforced by watching a program on the television which appears to be agreeing with my worldview. And this is one of the very important aspects that we begin to need to analyse when we look at the extent to which the media affects us. Because we are most influenced by the media when it appears to be lining up with the worldview that we already hold. And the media know this and therefore become very good at trying to tell you that they agree with you in order to then get you to agree with them. And this is the point at which media influence begins to occur. In order to understand this interplay between the person, their worldview, and the space within which they can be influenced, and the media, we start talking a lot in media analysis about the concept of codes. Codes are repeated messages that we instantly recognize because they are symbols which are instantaneously make sense to us. So if I show you a rose, you know this symbolically means something about love, relationships, positive well-being. if I show you an onion, you know this instantly means something about cooking or maybe being French, the French onion seller in his stripy top and beret going around selling his onions. You've got codes that you already recognise, therefore I can shortcut straight into the point in which it's possible to influence your beliefs by showing you the right codes so that you feel comfortable and in agreement with me before I give you new information. And this is what happens with the media that makes people change their attitudes. It always happens slowly over time. It never happens instantaneously, because if I show you media that you just disagree with, you continue to just disagree with it. However, I can get you to very, very slowly over a lot of time change an opinion by very subtly altering the codes. So at no point in time are you actually in disagreement, yet your opinion is very slowly changing. When we look at codes within the media, we're looking at a huge array of issues. Concepts about what makes a normal family, concepts about social class, concepts about gender, they're all there. When we take apart what is happening on a soap opera, what is happening on the news in the evening, what's happening in any of these areas, we're seeing these codes constantly repeated, the same little messages over and over again, the tiny drip, drip, drip that reinforces that, for example, a normal family is mum and dad and children, but a normal family does not include grandparents, let us say. It's not that we've ever been told that in that form in one television program or one newspaper article. It's that every time we watch a soap opera, it presents that as normal and the other as abnormal. So when we do the exercise where I ask you, everyone draw a matchstick figure of a family, everyone draws a matchstick figure of a mummy and a daddy and 2 children, and nobody does anything different, because this is a media code. And in order to analyse media influence, what we need to do is we need to analyse these codes. We need to uncover what they are and how they are working in order to subtly shift our views. When we talk about whether or not the media influences children, these same issues are extremely important, probably more so than with adults. On the one hand, children's worldviews are less fixed. So children are more easily influenced by the media in some ways than adults are, because they're less likely to be able to instantly recognise that television program, that newspaper article, whatever it is, it disagrees with me, it's coming from another worldview. It's asking me to be pro-life when I'm pro-choice, or vice versa. It's asking me to agree with the Tories when I'm a Labour voter, or vice versa. An adult is very, very good at instantly recognising that this media comes from a different worldview of mine and ignoring it. A child doesn't yet know whether they're pro-life or pro-choice. A child doesn't yet know whether they want to be a Tory voter or a Labour voter, and therefore a child is more open to not recognising that the media comes from an alternative worldview and dismissing it. On the other hand, children can be seen as less open to media manipulation and influence, because in a different way, children have picked up far fewer codes and repeated symbolic images over time. They haven't been told as often as adults in this drip, drip, drip way that something should be held as pure common sense, and therefore children can be much better than adults at instantly recognising something within the media that's inherently illogical or inherently not true, while an adult will accept it because it sits with a code they've been told all their life. The child is less familiar with the code and therefore finds it easier to actually be the savvy consumer in that context. And so we see, when we look at analysing media influence, that we are not zombies, we're not dupes. We don't go out and steal cars because we played Grand Theft Auto, and we don't go out and murder people because we watched a violent horror film. Equally, we can see that despite having our own free will, and despite having our own agency and our own intelligence and our own capacity to choose our own media and interact with it in the way we want, we do retain some vulnerabilities whereby small, repeated and constantly repeated images nonetheless can help subtly shift our worldviews in ways we may not be aware of, and therefore, from a very simple level, such as making us purchase one product rather than another by having that product advertised more often, or making us shift our political views very, very slightly because we've had the same message repeated to us so often that we begin to stop thinking it through and just accept it as common sense because we think we've been so told so often that that's what people like us believe, that's our worldview, that we stop thinking about it, and in actual fact our political views have shifted slightly, not through our own intellect but through exposure to the media which is telling us that we should believe this. We therefore are influenced to some extent. Children are influenced too, but children, while they're influenced in very slightly different ways, nonetheless they are also just like adults. They do also have some capacity to reject media images. They do have some capacity to apply their own free will and their own agency and make up their own decisions in their own minds. But that is not to say that the media has no influence on them. In fact, it continues to be, and always will be, a very major part of their life. So next week's lecture, we're going to go back in time as we look at each form of the media in turn. We're going to start with playground songs and fairy tales, children's games, those type of media that have gone back in time, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 years that have always been around. And from there, we're going to go through a whole range of other media, and we're going to look at the impacts that they have on childhood. See you next week.